Welcome to Capital Catch-Up, the podcast that brings you a clear look at what's happening in Washington. I'm Victor.
And I'm Lainey. Today we have a packed agenda. A series of bills aimed at improving outcomes for foster youth, major appropriations for energy, water, and the legislative branch, a privacy bill for email, a sweeping employment verification law, several resolutions on renewable fuels, menstrual health, foreign policy, and a handful of judicial and State Department nominations. We'll walk through each item, explain how the legislative process works, and discuss what it could mean for everyday Americans.
Let's start with the Foster Youth Package. The first piece is the Fresh Starts for Foster Youth Act. Introduced in the House on February 12, 2026, and reported with an amendment on May 11th, the bill would amend the Social Security Act to require states, when planning a foster care case, to consider legal issues that affect a youth's housing, education, employment, and family connections. It also gives states the option to tap funds from the John H. Chafee foster care program for successful transition to adult, often called the Chafee program, to pay for legal counseling and related services.
In plain terms, that means a foster youth could get a lawyer or legal advice as part of their case plan, helping them avoid pitfalls like eviction or loss of benefits. The bill would take effect 1 year after enactment, giving states time to adjust their case planning processes.
The next bill, the Foster Youth Workforce Opportunity Act, also reported with an amendment on May 11th, expands education and workforce training for youth who have been in foster care. It widens eligibility to include those who entered foster care at age 14 or older, and it adds apprenticeships, vocational training, and remedial education to the mix.
That's significant because many foster youth leave care without a high school diploma or marketable skills. By opening up apprenticeships and vocational pathways, the bill aims to close that gap and help these young adults secure stable jobs.
The Connect Act, officially the Chafee Opportunities for New Networks and Existing Connection Trust Act, updates the purpose of the Chafee program. It shifts the focus toward building sustained, supportive relationships with mentors, peers, and adults. The bill provides guidance to states and tribal agencies on how to implement these relationship-building strategies.
Research shows that having a trusted adult can dramatically improve outcomes for youth transitioning out of care. By codifying that into the program's purpose, the Connect Act tries to make those relationships a core part of the support system, rather than an afterthought.
Then we have the Support for Expectant and Parenting Foster Youth Act. This one ties the foster youth system to the maternal, infant, and early childhood home visiting program. It requires states to connect pregnant or parenting foster youth with evidence-based home visiting services, and it allows the use of Chafee funds for tailored case management and resource coordination.
For a teen mother in foster care, that could mean regular visits from a trained professional who helps with prenatal care, parenting skills, and linking to child care resources, critical supports that can keep both mother and child healthy.
The Foster Youth Postsecondary Education Access and Success Act raises the maximum education and training voucher from $5,000 to $12,000. It also mandates that states make a reasonable effort to inform eligible youth about the vouchers and simplify the application process.
That's a direct financial boost. A $12,000 voucher can cover tuition, books, or even living expenses for a community college or trade school, making higher education far more attainable for someone who might otherwise be stuck in low-wage work.
Finally, in this cluster, the Fostering the Future Act bundles many of these ideas together. It modernizes the Social Security Act to expand education and training, increase the voucher amount, allow Chafee funds to be used for housing assistance and counseling, and ensure expectant and parenting youth have access to home visiting services. The bill takes effect 1 year after enactment, unless a state needs to pass its own legislation first, in which case it kicks in after the next regular session of that state legislature.
Taken as a whole, these bills represent a comprehensive push to address the transition gap that many foster youth face when they age out of the system. If enacted, they could reduce homelessness, increase college enrollment, and improve employment outcomes for a vulnerable population.
Moving on to appropriations, the House passed the Energy and Water Development and Related Agencies Appropriations Act for fiscal year 2027. The bill allocates $6.255 billion for operation and maintenance of existing river and harbor projects, $2.382 billion for new construction, $223 million for administration of navigable waters and wetlands laws, $40 million for flood control and coastal emergencies, and $218 million for Civil Works Program Administration.
In everyday terms, that money keeps our ports running, funds new dams and levees, and supports flood mitigation, critical for communities along the Gulf Coast, the Mississippi River, and other flood-prone areas. The bill also bars funds for certain activities, like water supply reallocation studies, ensuring the money stays focused on core infrastructure.
The House also approved the Legislative Branch Appropriations Act for FY 2027. It provides $2.1 billion for the House, including $900 million for members, representational allowances, essentially the budget members use to serve constituents, and $453.9 million for salaries and expenses of officers and staff. Funding also goes to joint committees, the Capitol Police, the Office of Congressional Workplace Rights, and the Congressional Budget Office. Notably, the bill includes provisions for cybersecurity upgrades and workplace misconduct training.
Those cybersecurity provisions are increasingly important as Congress modernizes its IT systems. For the public, stronger security means better protection of the data that flows through our government.
On the privacy front, the Email Privacy Act was introduced in the House. It updates the law to require law enforcement agencies to obtain a warrant before accessing the content of stored electronic communications held by third-party providers, except in narrowly defined emergencies. It also adds voluntary disclosure requirements for service providers and mandates notice to the subscriber when a warrant is executed.
This brings email privacy in line with the expectations many people have after the Supreme Court's Carpenter decision on cell site location data. It balances privacy rights with legitimate investigative needs.
Turning to employment, Senate Bill 4620 seeks to permanently establish the E-Verify system and mandate its use by all employers. E-Verify is an online tool that checks a new hire's information against government records to confirm employment eligibility.
If passed, every employer, from a small family-run shop to a multinational corporation, would have to run each new employee through E-Verify. Proponents argue it will reduce illegal hiring and protect wages, while critics worry about potential errors that could wrongly block lawful workers. The bill would also create enforcement mechanisms and penalties for non-compliance.
The Senate also passed a resolution designating May 2026 as Renewable Fuels Month. The resolution highlights how renewable fuels, ethanol, biodiesel, renewable diesel, lower fuel prices, cut greenhouse gas emissions, and support rural economies.
While a symbolic gesture, it can raise public awareness and encourage policymakers to continue supporting the renewable fuel standard and related research, which in turn can affect the price you pay at the pump.
The House passed 3 related resolutions. First, House Resolution 1323 recognizes May as National Menstrual Health Awareness Month, aiming to eliminate period stigma, improve access to menstrual products, and promote research on menstrual health conditions.
That's a public health issue that affects millions of women, girls, and people who menstruate. Normalizing the conversation can lead to better school policies, workplace accommodations, and insurance coverage for menstrual products.
House Resolution 1321 calls on the government of Nigeria to ensure that legal proceedings involving Mazi Nnamdi Kanu are conducted in full accordance with Nigeria's constitutional obligations and international human rights commitments. The resolution expresses concern over alleged wrongful transfer, lack of due process, and inadequate medical care.
While it doesn't have binding force, it signals U.S. concern for due process and human rights abroad, and it can influence diplomatic engagement with Nigeria.
House Resolution 1322 condemns racist rhetoric targeting Indian and Chinese Americans, reaffirming that immigrants from all backgrounds are vital to the United States. It calls on elected officials to refrain from language that promotes racial or ethnic division.
In the current climate of heightened anti-Asian sentiment, this resolution serves as a formal rebuke and a reminder that hate speech undermines national unity.
Finally, House Concurrent Resolution 106 directs the removal of United States armed forces from hostilities in Cuba that have not been authorized by Congress. Sponsored by Representatives Velazquez and Meeks, the resolution invokes the War Powers Resolution, insisting that any military action must have congressional approval.
Though a concurrent resolution, it doesn't have the force of law, but it puts political pressure on the executive branch to seek authorization before engaging in combat operations, reinforcing the constitutional balance of war powers.
Let's pause to explain a few procedural points for our listeners. When a bill is introduced, it's assigned a number, like House Bill 7529 for the Fresh Starts for Foster Youth Act, and referred to a committee. The committee may hold hearings, amend the text, and then report the bill back to the full chamber, often with an amendment, as we saw on May 11th for several of these bills. Once reported, the full House or Senate debates may further amend and then votes. If both chambers pass identical versions, the bill goes to the President for signature or veto. Resolutions, like the Renewable Fuels Month resolution, usually express the sense of one chamber and don't require the President's signature. Concurrent resolutions, such as the one on Cuba, need approval from both chambers, but also don't go to the President. They're used for matters affecting the internal operations of Congress or expressing collective positions.
Nominations follow a different track. The President submits a nominee, like Jeffrey M. Coleman for the District of Kansas, and the Senate Judiciary Committee holds a hearing, votes to report the nomination, and then the full Senate votes on confirmation. Until confirmed, the nominee cannot assume the judicial or advisory role.
The congressional record entries for May 20th, 21, and 22 give us a snapshot of daily business, prayers, pledges, honors for veterans and community members, and the formal referral of bills to committees. While they may seem routine, they reflect the procedural cadence that moves legislation forward.
To sum up, we've covered a robust set of foster youth reforms that could dramatically improve legal support, education, and employment outcomes for a vulnerable group. We've seen appropriations that fund critical infrastructure and the operations of Congress itself. We've examined privacy and employment verification bills that touch on everyday digital and workplace experiences. And we've noted symbolic resolutions that address renewable energy, menstrual health, human rights abroad, and anti-racist commitments, as well as a war powers check on Cuba.
Listeners, keep an eye on the committee hearings for the foster youth bills, watch the Senate debate on the E-Verify mandate, and follow the confirmation hearings for the Judicial and State Department nominees. Those are the moments where the language we've discussed today will be refined or possibly altered before becoming law.
Thanks for joining us on Capitol Catch-Up. Stay informed, stay engaged, and we'll be back with the next round of developments from the Hill.